Abigail Rhodes had been up since 6 a.m. She wasn't exactly a culinary genius, but today everything had to be perfect. This was her first real dinner and maybe the most important one hosted in the house she bought with her own money. Her small Portland home was the reward of years of scrimping, saving, and extra shifts she never turned down. Tonight her family was coming over. She'd scrubbed the floors twice, marinated the roast with care, and even hand-rolled the crust on the apple cobbler, though she knew Linda, her mother, would still find something to frown at. On the table was her grandmother's blue-rimmed china, lovingly polished. She set place cards too, Douglas, her father, at the head, Linda to his right, Vanessa, her older sister, across from her. It wasn't just a dinner table. It was a silent plea for recognition. By 6:35 p.m., just as the pie finished baking, she heard tires crunching on the gravel. Abigail's stomach tensed. She adjusted the wine bottle for the third time, smoothed the skirt she rarely wore, and pasted on a practiced smile. Vanessa stepped in first without greeting. "Smells." "Fine," she said, boots tracking over the freshly mopped floor. Douglas followed, eyes scanning the ceiling, the walls, the pictures like he was inspecting a rental. "This place," he said, "has good bones. Feels like it should belong to everyone, doesn't it?" Abigail offered a small laugh, unsure if it was a compliment. Linda came in last, her hand grazing a photo on the mantel, the three of them back when Abigail was still little, still easy to control. Dinner began. The salad remained untouched. Vanessa scrolled her phone under the table. Douglas asked, "How did you afford hardwood floors without really listening?" Linda eventually muttered, "Everything's cooked," after a bite. Not a word about Abigail's promotion. As dessert was served, Douglas stood. Not just stood. He folded his napkin with precision and looked directly at Abigail. "We've talked about it," he began. "This house should come back to the family." She blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" Linda nodded, eyes down. "You've done well, sweetheart. But this place is too much for one person. You need to refocus." "It's not personal," Vanessa added, arms crossed. Douglas continued, calm and steady. "Your old room is still there, but we'll be moving in here. Ryan's already drawn up renovation plans." Abigail stood, her chair scraping. "You're what? You can't be serious." Linda's voice was ice. "Let's not make this emotional, honey. It's just a house." Vanessa returned with a suitcase, Abigail's college suitcase, green and all. "We packed your essentials. Just to make this smooth." Abigail's voice caught in her chest. After a breath, she whispered, "I'm the legal owner." Douglas gave a razor-thin smile. "We'll sort that out." Abigail didn't cry. Not in front of them. She simply bowed her head, reached for the house key she had polished that morning, and placed it next to her untouched glass of wine. No one spoke. No one moved. The dining room, once the symbol of her hope for reconciliation, now felt like a stage after the actors had left. Outside, the December wind cut through her coat like knives. She wheeled her green suitcase, the same one she'd used in college, to the back of her car. When the trunk slammed shut, it echoed like a verdict. No one peeked through the blinds. No voice called after her. Just her and silence. She drove with no destination. The city blurred past her gas stations, flickering neon signs, quiet porches. At every turn, the suitcase bumped loudly in the back like a pulse, trying to remind her that she had been erased from her own story. The truth was sharp now. Abigail had been evicted from the home she owned by people who shared her blood. Eventually, she pulled into a faded gas station on the edge of Portland. The kind that still sold plastic-wrapped pastries and car air fresheners that smelled like artificial pine. Under the hum of a flickering overhead light, Abigail sat in her car, hands trembling on the steering wheel. Then her phone buzzed. An unknown number. Somewhere deep inside, she already knew this call wasn't from the past. It was the part of her future they hadn't managed to steal yet. she answered. A chipper voice identified herself as a representative from Heritage National Bank. Someone had tried to add co-owners to Abigail's mortgage account, Douglas and Linda Rhodes. The request had been flagged. The account was frozen. Abigail was still the sole legal owner. "Thank you," she said, steady now. Then she hung up and exhaled, not relief, not rage, but something closer to resolve. She didn't go back home. There was no home to return to. Instead, she drove again this time, not because she was lost, but because she had just remembered who she was. Abigail sat in her parked car on a quiet street at the edge of Portland. Street lights flickered above, casting faint shadows across the windshield. She hadn't turned on the dome light. The soft blue glow of her phone screen was enough. Her breath fogged the glass. She was waiting for the call to end or begin. She knew it was coming, the confirmation. And when her phone buzzed again, her thumb hovered, then pressed accept. She lifted it to her ear with cold, steady fingers. "Hello, Ms. Rhodes. This is Alexis from the mortgage division at Heritage National Bank." The voice was calm, too bright for the late hour. "I'm calling to verify some recent changes requested on your account." Abigail's spine straightened. "What kind of changes?" "There was a request to add 2 co-owners to your mortgage file, Douglas and Linda Rhodes. It also included changes to the primary contact information and mailing address." She clenched the steering wheel through the engine was long off. "I didn't authorize any of that. I've never shared access." A pause. "Then, that's what we suspected. You are still listed as the sole legal owner. No co-signers, no power of attorney, nothing shared. We've locked the account and flagged it for attempted fraud." Abigail exhaled, not relief, but focus. "Please send me all documentation related to the request." "Absolutely," Alexis replied. "And I'm sorry this happened." Abigail ended the call, her fingers resting on the wheel. Outside, warm windows glowed in the distance, each one like a memory she no longer belonged to. But now she held something they couldn't erase with silence or guilt, legal truth. This wasn't the end of the story. This was the beginning. Not of forgiveness, but of fight back. Abigail sat quietly in Rachel's living room, the only friend who hadn't vanished when things got complicated. The space was scattered with coffee mugs, scattered paperwork, and a silence that didn't judge. It was the kind of silence you give someone who's just watched their life detonate. Rachel didn't push. She simply placed Abigail's old laptop on the table and stepped back, sensing this wasn't a moment to crowd. Abigail opened it. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she remembered she'd installed a basic home security system when she moved in. Not because she feared break-ins, but because she was a woman living alone. The cameras had been set to record motion-triggered clips and auto-upload to the cloud. She hadn't looked at them since. She logged in, fumbled the password twice with shaky fingers. Then rows and rows of video thumbnails appeared, each just a few seconds or minutes long. Small slices of domestic life, a door opening, lights flicking on footsteps on hardwood. And then she saw it. First Linda, her mother, calmly opening drawers in Abigail's home office. Not rummaging, just opening, closing, inspecting. Like a realtor taking inventory before a sale. Next was Vanessa. She stood by the mantel, sliding Abigail's photo out of its frame and replacing it with one of herself and Douglas. Like it was her place all along. Then Douglas sitting in Abigail's chair, opening her laptop like it was his typing something. Then leaning back to test the chair's tilt like he was settling in for the long term. Abigail didn't cry. She had no tears left to give. She began saving each clip. Time-stamped. Cataloged. She created a new folder on the desktop and titled it simply, "They Took It." The next morning, Abigail stepped into a modest law office tucked between 2 brick buildings in downtown Portland. The air was damp from a steady drizzle, not enough to soak her coat, but enough to chill through. Rachel walked beside her, silent but steady. Inside, attorney Susan Myers greeted them with a handshake that was dry, firm, and businesslike. Her demeanor was sharp, but not unkind. She listened closely as Abigail laid it all out: the dinner, the suitcase, the call from the bank, the security footage. Susan didn't look shocked. "You're not the first," she said. "The ugliest cases of property theft rarely come from strangers, they come from family." Abigail laid out the documents: the purchase contract, the paid-off mortgage statement, the deed in her name and her name alone. Each paper felt like a small victory in ink, proof that she wasn't crazy, wasn't overreacting, that she still had ground to stand on. Susan began drafting a cease and desist letter. It was clinical, precise, and cut through the emotional mess like a scalpel. Any continued occupation, manipulation, or claim to ownership of the property located at this address constitutes a legal violation. Sole legal owner Abigail Rhodes. Rachel glanced at Abigail. She wasn't trembling anymore. Her shoulders were square, her face calm. She didn't need to raise her voice. She let the paperwork speak for her. That evening, Abigail backed up every file, the footage, the emails, the documents onto an external hard drive. She created a new master folder and named it "Counterattack Begins." That night in the guest room of Rachel's apartment, Abigail didn't sleep. She lay on top of the blankets, eyes fixed on the ceiling, bathed in the soft glow of a night lamp. Her mind moved like an old tape, replaying each moment of betrayal in slow, painful detail. Then out of nowhere, a memory surfaced. She was 22, still in college. She'd come home for the weekend to get some documents notarized. As she passed by her father's home office, she heard him say, "She'll sign. Once she does, we'll handle the rest." Vanessa had laughed. She has no idea. Back then, Abigail had convinced herself it was about taxes, something bureaucratic. She didn't want to believe they saw her not as a daughter, but as a pawn. Now, in the dim quiet of truth, she understood that wasn't the beginning. It was just the first time she saw the blueprint of betrayal. The next morning, she rose early, opened her laptop, and sat at Rachel's kitchen table. Slowly, steadily, she began to type. No dramatic phrasing, no tears, just facts. "My name is Abigail Rhodes. This is a record of what was taken from me by people I share blood with. This isn't for sympathy. This is for documentation." She hit record. Her voice was calm, her shoulders square. Then she saved the file to her external hard drive, the same one holding all her evidence. No elaborate title, just statement. For Abigail, this wasn't about emotion anymore. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need pity. Her silence had become evidence, and evidence doesn't flinch. That morning, Abigail was pouring coffee in Rachel's kitchen when her phone buzzed. The caller ID lit up Douglas Rhodes. She didn't answer. 3 minutes later, a voicemail landed. She tapped play. Her father's voice came through low, deliberate, not angry, but controlled, like he was issuing a warning across a boardroom table, not threatening his daughter. "You just started something you won't be able to finish." No greeting, no question, just a message sharp as a blade wrapped in calm. Abigail didn't flinch. She didn't panic. She simply hit forward, sent the voicemail to attorney Susan Myers, and typed one line, "They've started threatening." Susan replied within minutes. "We anticipated this. Let them expose themselves. We press harder." While they stirred shadows, Abigail brought everything into light. She called Heritage National Bank again to reconfirm that access to her mortgage and deed accounts was still locked. This time the tone was different. "I'm sorry, Ms. Rhodes," the rep said cautiously. "Due to ongoing legal action, we can only provide further information through your legal representative." Abigail understood instantly Douglas and Linda were trying to reframe the narrative behind the scenes. When Rachel heard, she didn't gasp, she nodded. "This isn't personal anymore. It's strategic." Abigail agreed, but she wasn't shaken. For the first time in years, she wasn't reacting. She was leading. That evening, Abigail sat alone at Rachel's kitchen table. Her laptop glowed softly beside a stack of folders and her external drive. The anxiety had faded. The guessing was over. Now it was about action, clear, deliberate, grounded. She opened each document one by one, the purchase agreement, mortgage payoff confirmation, the official deed. Every file read like a blade, precise, irrefutable. Her hand paused over a PDF labeled Release of Lien, dated 6 months earlier. She remembered that day well, a light drizzle, the quiet lobby of the bank the moment she handed over the final payment. No witnesses, no help. She'd done it all alone. Then came the title deed. She clicked it open. There it was in bold, sole owner Abigail Rhodes. She whispered her name aloud, not for reassurance, but recognition. This was hers. Always had been. She opened a new email draft. No subject line, no message. Just 3 attachments: the lien release, the deed, and her mortgage payment record. Recipient attorney Susan Myers. Abigail took a breath, not from fear, but steadiness. For the first time in days, she felt the ground beneath her was solid. Paper doesn't lie. Signatures can't be undone by whispered threats. And this time, her story wasn't just being told, it was being proven. On a cold Monday morning, the Portland County Courthouse loomed like stone judgment. Abigail stood at the steps, pulling her coat tighter, clutching a file folder in her hand. Beside her, attorney Susan Myers radiated calm control. Rachel followed silently, not to speak, but to stand as witness. Inside the courtroom felt colder than outside, fluorescent lights, stiff benches, and a tension thick enough to feel. Across from them sat Douglas, Linda, and Vanessa, dressed like executives at a board meeting, not defendants in a civil hearing. When proceedings began, Susan wasted no time. She laid everything out clearly: video evidence, legal documents, the threatening voicemail, even clips from Abigail's home surveillance. One by one, the facts nailed the truth into place. When asked to respond, Douglas rose first. His voice was measured, his eyes avoiding Abigail. "We were trying to protect family assets. This was a misunderstanding. If Abigail had just listened, it wouldn't have come to this." Susan interrupted smoothly, holding up the falsified ownership document submitted to the bank. "Do you deny submitting this request?" He paused. "I had no criminal intent." Then came Vanessa. She adjusted her scarf, tone clipped and superior. "I was just helping my parents organize the property. Abigail doesn't even like entertaining. She never really used the office." Susan lifted a printed photo, Vanessa packing Abigail's labeled folders into a box marked with her own name. The judge leaned forward. "You believed this space belonged to you." Vanessa hesitated. It felt like shared responsibility. Then Abigail stepped forward. She took the oath, sat down, and spoke clearly. "I purchased that house with my own income. Every dollar. I am the sole legal owner. They entered without permission, changed the locks, and erased me like I never existed." The room held its breath. The judge nodded, speaking slowly. "This court finds that Ms. Abigail Rhodes is the sole legal owner of the property in question. A temporary restraining order is granted. Further investigation into financial misconduct will commence." Abigail didn't smile. She didn't need to. She had finally been heard. When Abigail turned the key, the door opened with the same creak she once found familiar. But today it didn't feel welcoming. It felt hesitant, like the house wasn't sure whether to trust her again. The living room looked almost untouched, yet completely unfamiliar. The soft cream curtains she had sewn were gone, replaced by stiff blue panels. New frames lined the walls, old wedding photos of Douglas and Linda Vanessa posing with her dog. Abigail's presence had been erased. She walked through the house slowly, not to inspect, but to be there. She didn't rush to clean. She didn't rush to reclaim. Every object was a cut, but also a reminder they had been here and now they weren't. Abigail pulled out cardboard boxes and labeled them, "Not mine." Into them went vases she didn't buy photos. She wasn't in magazines she never read. Not out of anger, but out of clarity. This was about drawing lines what belonged to her and what never did. In the kitchen, tucked behind the knife tray, she found an envelope. Her mother's handwriting. Inside a handwritten note. "You'll understand one day. Family is complicated. We did this to protect what matters. No apology, no regret." Abigail didn't tear it up. She took it to the backyard, placed it in the fire pit, and lit it from the corner. The words curled and turned to ash. She whispered, not in bitterness, "I understand now. Just not the way you hoped." Then she returned inside and opened every window, letting in the wind, the cold, the realness. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel invaded. It didn't feel stolen. It began to feel like something else, a place she could rebuild, not in spite of the past, but because of it. Abigail was arranging fresh flowers on the windowsill when she heard a car pull up outside. She didn't need to look the gray SUV, the familiar license plate, the too careful way it parked. Vanessa. She stepped out with just her purse. No gift, no apology, no knocking. Just standing there waiting to be let in. Abigail didn't speak. She opened the door, not exactly inviting, but not stopping her either. Vanessa walked in, her eyes scanning the walls. New photos. Abigail and Rachel at the courthouse. Abigail and Mrs. Whitmore at the holiday market. No blood relatives, but somehow more family than anyone who ever shared her DNA. "It's quiet in here," Vanessa said, perching on the edge of the couch. "The house feels different." Abigail nodded. "For the first time, it actually belongs to me." Silence lingered until Vanessa said, "I know it got out of hand. None of us thought it would go that far." Abigail met her gaze. "You're not here to apologize. You're here to spin the story before it spreads." Vanessa blinked. Quick but telling. Maybe she admitted. "Maybe I didn't think you deserved it. Maybe I was jealous." Abigail didn't react with anger. That part of her had already burned away. She simply said, "You don't get to rewrite your role just because I survived it." Vanessa didn't reply. She stood slowly, headed for the door. Not because she was thrown out, but because Abigail no longer needed to leave it open. On New Year's morning, a soft layer of snow blanketed the porch. Abigail sat on the living room floor, legs tucked beneath a knit blanket Rachel had gifted her, fingers wrapped around a mug of hot tea. The house was quiet but not empty. It was a deliberate kind of quiet, the kind that speaks of peace, not absence. She looked around the room. The new curtains, ones she'd chosen herself, filtered the light just enough to warm the hardwood floors. The bookshelf now held her books, her photos, and her people. Not inherited, not expected, chosen. Abigail stood and walked from room to room, not to inspect for damage, but to simply be present in the space she once had to leave. In the kitchen, everything was in order. Spices alphabetized, her favorite blue mug sitting where it belonged. In the office, she pinned a small card to her corkboard. It read, "Freedom is not the absence of memory, it's knowing those memories don't own you anymore." There were no more envelopes from Linda. No more knocks from Vanessa. No familiar footsteps echoing down the hall. And she didn't need them. She didn't need revenge. She needed space to exist as herself, and finally she had it.